What if I told you that one of the greatest linguistic discoveries of our time was made by a teenager in a cleaning uniform? What if I told you that the person who solved a puzzle that defeated 50 experts was invisible to everyone in the room, until one cruel moment changed everything? Welcome to Folktales Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button, like and comment where you're watching from. Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to tell you a story today that will stay with you long after you finish watching. It's a story about a young man who nobody saw. It's about how the world can be so blind sometimes that it misses greatness standing right in front of it. And most importantly, it's about what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Let me take you back to a cold morning in London. No, actually, let me start before that. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus Thompson was just 17 years old, and like millions of other teenagers in the world, he had dreams. Big dreams. Dreams of becoming a scholar, of discovering things about the world that nobody had discovered before. But Marcus didn't grow up in a wealthy home with tutors and private schools. Marcus grew up in the working-class neighborhoods of East London, with his mother, Catherine, who cleaned offices and schools to make ends meet. Catherine was the kind of woman that the world doesn't see. She woke up at 5 in the morning, worked 10-hour days, and came home exhausted. But every single night, she made sure Marcus had food on the table, that he did his homework, and that he never forgot where he came from. She worked as a cleaning staff member at the prestigious Cambridge Institute of Historical Languages, one of the most respected research centers in all of Europe. And because Catherine worked long hours, sometimes Marcus would accompany her on special events to help out and earn a little money for the family. This is important for you to understand because this detail, this small fact, will change everything. Now let me tell you about Professor Daniel Sheffield. Daniel was what you might call successful. He was famous. He appeared on television programs, podcasts, and documentaries. He was known across Europe as a man who spoke 34 languages fluently. He had published dozens of books. He had a corner office with a view. He gave speeches at universities. Students wanted to be like him. Other academics cited his work. He had everything that the world told you to want. But there was something inside Daniel that was hungry in a way that had nothing to do with ambition. It was a hunger for control, a need to feel superior, a thirst to prove that he was better than everyone around him. And that hunger, as it often does, would lead to his downfall. I want you to picture this moment with me because I need you to feel what I'm about to describe. It was a Thursday afternoon in early November. The Cambridge Institute was hosting the International Conference on Ancient Languages. This was a big deal. Scholars from all over Europe had gathered. There were experts in Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, dead languages that nobody spoke anymore. There were 50 of the brightest linguistic minds that you could find on the continent. The auditorium was full. Cameras were there. The media was paying attention. They had brought in an ancient stone. This stone had been discovered in an excavation in the Scottish Highlands, in a place where ancient Celtic people once lived. The stone had symbols on it. Nobody could read it. The symbols looked like a mix of old Celtic markings and something else, something nobody could quite put their finger on. For 3 hours the leading experts had tried. 3 hours of presentations, theories, arguments, and nothing. Not a single person could make sense of what the stone said. Professor Daniel Sheffield was frustrated. And when Daniel got frustrated, he got cruel. Let me paint you the picture of what happened next. I want you to see it, to feel it, because this moment is where everything turns. Marcus was in the back of the auditorium, cleaning the tables where people had their coffee during the break. He was wearing the same uniform that his mother wore. He was invisible. Nobody looked at him. Nobody asked his name. He was just the kid cleaning the tables, making minimum wage, helping his mother out. Daniel stood in front of the projector screen, looking at this stone that wouldn't give up its secrets, and something inside him broke. He was used to being right. He was used to people admiring him. He was used to having the answers. And this stone was beating him. This made him angry. He turned to the audience and made a joke. He pointed at Marcus and said something like, "How about we ask that young man over there to try? Maybe he'll have better luck than us." Maybe he has some special insight that our degrees and years of research don't give us. And he laughed. He laughed loudly, cruelly, and the audience laughed with him. Can you imagine what that feels like? To be 17 years old. To be invisible. To suddenly have 300 eyes turned on you with judgment and mockery. To have someone of authority pointing at you like you're a joke. Marcus froze. His heart was pounding. His mother, Catherine, who was working in the event coordination area nearby, heard the laughter. She knew what had happened. She knew that her son had been humiliated in front of all these important people. But here's the thing that nobody in that auditorium knew. They didn't know that Marcus had spent the last 4 years secretly teaching himself languages. They didn't know that he went to the library and read linguistics textbooks while his mother worked night shifts. They didn't know that he had been corresponding with researchers at universities under a fake name. They didn't know that his grandfather, Catherine's father, had been a brilliant self-taught scholar who studied ancient languages before he passed away. And they definitely didn't know that Marcus had inherited his grandfather's journals, his notes, his life's work on forgotten languages. Most importantly, they didn't know that Marcus had been studying this exact language for 2 years. The stones that had been discovered in the Scottish Highlands were written in a language that only his grandfather had known. A language that had been created by ancient Celtic communities as a way to preserve their history and their wisdom. His grandfather had spent decades documenting it, writing it down, creating translation guides. And he had passed all of that knowledge to Marcus. But Marcus didn't know any of this yet. He didn't know that the laughter was about to become one of the most important moments of his life. Catherine came over quickly, her face red with shame and anger. "Come on, baby," she whispered to Marcus. "Don't pay attention to him. Let's just finish up and go home." But Marcus couldn't move. He was looking at the stone on the screen. And something was happening inside him. The symbols on that screen were the same symbols that his grandfather had taught him. They were the same symbols in his grandfather's journals that sat in a locked box under his bed at home. They were as familiar to him as his own handwriting. Professor Daniel noticed that Marcus wasn't leaving. "On the contrary," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm genuinely curious. Come on, son. Show us what you know." This was the moment. This was the turning point. Marcus could have stayed quiet. He could have listened to his mother. He could have let this moment pass. But something inside him, maybe it was his grandfather's spirit, maybe it was his own courage, maybe it was just a young man tired of being invisible, made him walk forward. "May I look at the stone?" Marcus asked quietly. The whole room went silent. Nobody expected this. Nobody expected the invisible boy to have a voice. As Marcus walked toward the front of the auditorium, I want you to understand what was happening inside him. His hands were shaking. His mind was racing. He had never done anything like this before. He had never stood up in front of important people. He had never challenged anyone. He was 17 years old and he was about to do something that would either prove him as a genius or make him look like a complete fool in front of 50 experts and a room full of cameras. Catherine sat down in the back, her hands clasped together so tightly that her fingernails were digging into her palms. She was terrified. She had worked at that institute for 15 years without making a fuss, without drawing attention, without doing anything that would jeopardize her job. And now her son was walking into the spotlight, walking into danger. Professor Daniel watched Marcus approach the screen with a mixture of amusement and contempt. He thought this was going to be entertaining. He thought he was about to witness a young man embarrass himself in spectacular fashion. He had no idea what was about to happen. "The microphone is over there," Daniel said, gesturing broadly like he was inviting Marcus onto a game show. "Go ahead. Tell us all about this ancient mystery." Marcus stood in front of the microphone. He looked at the stone. He looked at the symbols. And then he looked at Professor Daniel. In that moment, something changed in Marcus's eyes. The fear didn't go away, but it was joined by something else. Confidence. Knowledge. Truth. "These symbols," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, "they're not what you think they are." He pointed at the stone projected on the screen. You've been reading them like they're standard Celtic markings, right? Like they follow the grammatical patterns of known Celtic languages. But they don't. Because this isn't standard Celtic. This is something much older. This is a language that was created deliberately to be difficult to read. To be protected. The whole room had gone completely silent. The professors were leaning forward. The cameras were recording. Professor Daniel's face had gone pale. This is a secret language, Marcus continued. It was created by ancient Celtic communities to preserve their spiritual knowledge. The symbols look like Celtic at first glance, but the structure is completely different. The rules are different. The meanings are layered. He walked closer to the screen, pointing at specific symbols. See this symbol here. You probably read it as meaning mountain, right? But it doesn't. It means place of protection. And this one means the wisdom that survives. The whole phrase translates to something like, in this place of protection, we leave the wisdom that survives for those who come after. Professor Helena Moore, one of the most respected linguists in the room, stood up. She was known for her work on ancient Celtic languages. She was looking at Marcus with an expression of shock and fascination. How do you know this? She asked. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment where he had to decide whether to tell the truth or to make something up. He could have lied. He could have said he studied it in books or online. But Marcus believed in honesty. He believed in truth. So he told them. My grandfather studied this language, Marcus said. He was a self-taught scholar. He spent his whole life documenting it. He left his notes and his research to me. Professor Daniel let out a sharp laugh. Oh, how wonderful. Another family legend. So your grandfather was some sort of expert in ancient Celtic languages. What university did he attend? He didn't attend university, Marcus said calmly. He taught himself. Of course he did, Daniel said, his voice dripping with mockery. And now you, at 17 years old, are going to tell us that you've decoded an ancient language that stumped 50 of the most educated people in Europe. That's quite a story, son. Marcus didn't respond with anger. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn notebook. It was old, with yellowed pages and handwriting that had faded over time. It was his grandfather's journal. My grandfather documented everything, Marcus said, holding up the notebook. He created a system for reading this language. He believed that knowledge shouldn't die with one person. He believed it should be preserved and passed on. Professor Helena walked to the front of the room. May I see that? She asked respectfully. Professor Daniel tried to stop her. Helena, we can't possibly give credence to this. This is a family story. This is folklore. But Helena ignored him. She took the notebook from Marcus's hands and began to read. As she turned the pages, her expression changed completely. Her eyes widened. Her hands began to tremble slightly. This is... She whispered. This is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. She looked at Marcus. Your grandfather didn't just document this language. He created a complete linguistic system for understanding it. This is academic-level work. Professional work. This is the kind of analysis that takes years of formal training. His name was Michael Thompson, Marcus said quietly. He passed away 5 years ago, but before he died, he made me promise to keep his work alive. Professor Helena looked through the notebook page by page. There were detailed diagrams of how the language worked. There were comparison charts showing how it related to known Celtic languages. There were translations and explanations. There were years of careful, systematic study. Michael Thompson, Helena said, her voice filled with recognition. Oh my God. Michael Thompson wrote a series of articles in the 1980s about ancient Celtic linguistic systems. They were revolutionary. He was about to change the entire field, and then he just disappeared from academia. Marcus nodded. He said he didn't want to work with universities anymore. He wanted to teach people in his community. He wanted to help ordinary people understand their heritage. The whole room was in shock. 50 educated adults were realizing that a 17-year-old boy in a cleaning uniform had just solved a puzzle that had defeated all of them. But Professor Daniel wasn't ready to accept this. His ego was wounded. His pride was hurt. He stood up from his seat. "This is absurd," he said loudly. "A teenager cannot possibly have the credentials or the knowledge to translate an ancient language. This is either a hoax or the boy has memorized some family stories. Either way, it means nothing." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Dr. Sheffield," he said, using Daniel's formal title with respect. "You sent an email to Professor Richardson at Oxford 3 weeks ago, didn't you? You asked him for advice on this exact stone. You wanted to use it for your presentation here." Professor Daniel's face went white. "How do you?" he started to say. "Because Professor Richardson forwarded your email to me," Marcus said. "I'm the specialist on his research team for ancient Celtic languages. I've been working with him for 4 years on this exact project." Marcus reached into his backpack again and pulled out his laptop. He connected it to the projection system. The large screen lit up, displaying a website for Oxford University's Department of Linguistics. It showed a research project titled, "The Hidden Languages of Ancient Celtic Communities, a Study of Secret Linguistic Systems." And there, listed as a research associate, was the name Marcus Thompson. "I'm not just the cleaning lady's son," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm a researcher with Oxford University. I'm the person you were trying to ask for help. I'm the person you didn't respect enough to listen to." The room erupted. Professors were standing up, pulling out their phones, taking photos of the presentation. Journalists were making calls. This was not just a translation of an ancient stone. This was the discovery of the century. Professor Daniel sat down heavily in his chair. His face had gone completely pale. His arrogance, his cruelty, his sense of superiority, all of it was crumbling before his eyes. Catherine, watching from the back of the room, had tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of pride so intense that she could barely breathe. Her son was standing there, claiming his place in the world. Her son was being recognized for who he really was. And that's when Marcus did something that nobody expected. He looked directly at Professor Daniel and said, "I prepared a complete translation of the stone. Would you like me to present it?" The room fell silent. Everyone was waiting to see how Daniel would respond. "Do it," Professor Helena said, her voice carrying an authority that cut through the tension. "Show us what you've found." Marcus took a deep breath. He looked at his laptop, and he began to tell a story that would change everything. The story of his grandfather's work. The story of a forgotten language. The story of knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. "The stone we found in the Scottish Highlands," Marcus began, "is not just a random artifact. It's a message. A deliberate message left by ancient Celtic communities who wanted to preserve their spiritual knowledge for future generations." He clicked through slides showing the different symbols on the stone, breaking down each one, explaining its meaning, showing how they connected to form a larger message. "My grandfather spent 40 years studying this language," Marcus continued. He realized that the ancient Celtic people created it deliberately. They knew that their way of life was being threatened. They knew that their languages and their traditions might disappear. So they created this system, this hidden language that only people initiated into the knowledge could understand. He showed photographs of other stones, similar to the one that had stumped the experts. "Over the past 4 years, working with Professor Richardson's team at Oxford, we have located and translated 43 different inscriptions using this language. 43 messages that were left by ancient people, speaking across the centuries to us." The slides showed detailed academic research, photographs of stones, detailed translations, comparison charts with other known languages. audio recordings of how the language would have been spoken, maps showing where the stones had been found. "This is not folklore," Marcus said, looking directly at Professor Daniel. "This is scholarship. This is rigorous academic work. This is the kind of research that universities spend millions of dollars on. And it was done by a self-taught man who believed that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just to people with degrees from famous institutions." He clicked to the next slide, which showed academic publications. Articles in international journals. Presentations at European conferences. Published work that had been peer-reviewed and accepted by the highest standards of the academic world. "I have 3 published articles in international linguistic journals," Marcus said. "I have presented this research at universities in England, France, Germany, and Italy. I have been invited to speak at the most prestigious academic conferences in Europe. And I am 17 years old." Professor Daniel tried to stand up, but his legs were shaking too badly. He sat back down. "My mother," Marcus said, and his voice changed. Became more emotional, more personal. "My mother is the reason I'm here. She worked cleaning offices so that I could study. She worked night shifts so that I could have time to learn. She never complained. She never told me my dreams were too big. She believed in me when nobody else did." He looked toward the back of the room where Catherine was sitting. "She is not invisible," Marcus said, his voice powerful now. "She is not just a cleaning lady. She is a brilliant woman who sacrificed everything so that her son could have opportunities that she never had. And anyone who looks at her and sees anything less than that is wrong. They are the problem, not her. Them." The room was completely silent. Even the journalists had stopped taking notes. Everyone was moved by what Marcus was saying. "The saddest part," Marcus continued, turning back to address the room, "is that Dr. Sheffield, you are actually a competent linguist. I read your early work. Your articles from the 1990s were good. They were interesting. They contributed to the field. But somewhere along the way you confused knowledge with arrogance. You confused having a degree with having wisdom. You confused being educated with being enlightened." He paused, letting those words sink in. "You couldn't see what was right in front of you because you were too busy looking down at people. You couldn't recognize excellence because it didn't come wrapped in the packaging you expected. You couldn't hear the truth because you were too busy talking." Professor Helena stood up. She was looking at Marcus with an expression of profound respect. "Marcus Thompson," she said formally, "on behalf of the academic community, I want to apologize for how you were treated today. You have made a discovery that will change our understanding of how ancient peoples preserved their knowledge and their culture. You have shown that genius can come from anywhere. And you have taught us all a lesson in humility." She began to clap. Slowly at first, then other professors joined in. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was standing, clapping, some of them wiping away tears. Professor Daniel stood up and walked toward the exit. He moved like an old man, like someone who had suddenly aged years in the span of an hour. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed image of superiority, it was all crumbling. As he passed Marcus, Marcus said one more thing. "Dr. Sheffield, I still meant what I said in my email to Professor Richardson. I offered to mentor you. I offered to help you understand this research. That offer is still open. If you want to learn, I can teach you." Daniel didn't respond. He just kept walking, disappearing into the corridors of the building that would no longer welcome him. Marcus stepped down from the stage. Catherine came running toward him, and they hugged. She was crying, laughing, holding her son like she was making sure he was real. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I'm so incredibly proud of you." But Marcus wasn't thinking about the triumph. He was thinking about his grandfather. He was thinking about how his grandfather had believed in him, even after death. He was thinking about how knowledge that his grandfather had fought to preserve was finally being recognized. "Grandpa would have loved this," Marcus said quietly to his mother. "He always said that truth has a way of coming out, that you can't hide real knowledge, that eventually the world has to see it." That night Marcus didn't sleep. He was too excited. His phone was blowing up with messages. Professors were reaching out. Media outlets wanted to interview him. Universities wanted to collaborate with him. His life had changed in the course of a single afternoon. But the most important moment came when he opened his grandfather's journal and wrote a message on a blank page at the back. "Grandpa, we did it. The world knows now. Your work lives on. I promise to make sure it always will." I want to tell you what happened next, because this is the part of the story where we see the real consequence of Professor Daniel Sheffield's choices. This is the part where we see what happens when pride and arrogance finally catch up with a person. The video of what happened that day went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 3 million times. By the end of the week, it had been watched by over 50 million people around the world. People watched it because it was about injustice being corrected. People watched it because it was about a young man standing up to authority. People watched it because it was about the triumph of truth over cruelty. Social media lit up with the story. Marcus was suddenly famous. Teachers were showing the video in classrooms. The story was being discussed in universities across the world. News outlets were covering it. Podcasters were talking about it. It became a symbol of something bigger. It became about systemic prejudice, about how society overlooks talent when it comes from the wrong background, about how we judge people by their appearance instead of their abilities. But for Professor Daniel Sheffield, this fame was a nightmare. The University of Cambridge launched an investigation into his conduct. They found numerous incidents where he had been cruel to students and staff. They discovered that he had plagiarized work from junior researchers without giving them credit. They found evidence that he had stolen ideas from female scientists and presented them as his own. Within 3 months, Professor Daniel Sheffield was fired from his position. His television appearances were cancelled. Invitations to speak at conferences were withdrawn. Other universities distanced themselves from him. The scientific community, which had once celebrated him, now treated him like a pariah. His books were reviewed and questioned. Academics began to look more carefully at his published work. They found inconsistencies. They found places where his analysis didn't make sense. They found places where he seemed to have stolen ideas from other researchers. He became a symbol of everything that was wrong with academia. He became the poster child for toxic masculinity in the academic world. He became a cautionary tale. I want to be honest with you about something. Part of me feels sad about what happened to Professor Daniel Sheffield. Not because he didn't deserve consequences. He absolutely did. But because I think about what he could have been if he had chosen differently. I think about the research he could have done. The students he could have mentored. The contributions he could have made to human knowledge. Instead, he chose arrogance. He chose cruelty. He chose to look down on people. And that choice cost him everything. Meanwhile, Marcus's life was transforming in completely different ways. Oxford University officially hired him as their youngest research associate. They offered him a full scholarship to finish his high school education and then continue to university. He became the public face of their ancient languages research program. The British government created a new grant program dedicated to linguistic preservation. Marcus was asked to sit on the committee that decided which projects would receive funding. At 17 years old, he was helping to direct millions of dollars toward research that would have been ignored before. Netflix bought the rights to his story. They made a documentary about his life, about his grandfather's work, about how knowledge can be preserved and passed down across generations. The documentary won international awards. Universities around the world wanted to collaborate with him. He was invited to speak at the most prestigious conferences. He was offered positions that normally would only go to people with decades of experience. But the most beautiful thing that happened was what Marcus did with his newfound platform. He convinced his mother to leave her cleaning job. Instead, Catherine became the director of the Thompson Cultural Center, named after Marcus's grandfather. It was built in the working-class neighborhood where Marcus grew up. It was a place where young people from low-income families could come to learn about languages, about their heritage, about their potential. Catherine taught there. She taught young people about perseverance. She taught them that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. She taught them that their dreams matter. And she did it with a kind of love and wisdom that only comes from having lived through struggle. The salary she earned was 10 times higher than what she had made as a cleaning person. But more than that, she was finally appreciated. She was finally seen. She was finally recognized for the extraordinary woman that she had always been. Marcus often said in interviews that his mother was the real hero of his story. That without her sacrifice, none of it would have been possible. He made sure that the world knew her name. He made sure that she was celebrated. 1 year after the conference, Marcus published a book about his grandfather's work. It was called The Hidden Language: How Knowledge Survives Across Centuries. The book became an international bestseller. In the foreword, he wrote about his grandfather. He wrote about the years his grandfather had spent studying in solitude, convinced that nobody cared about his work. He wrote about how his grandfather had died believing that his research would die with him. But it hadn't. It had lived on through Marcus. And now, thanks to Marcus, it lived on through thousands of students who were learning about ancient Celtic languages. It lived on through researchers who were using his grandfather's methods to study other forgotten languages. It lived on through millions of people who watched the documentary and learned about the power of knowledge and perseverance. Marcus made sure that his grandfather received credit. In every presentation, in every article, in every interview, Marcus said his grandfather's name. He told his grandfather's story. He made sure that the world knew that Michael Thompson had been a genius, even though he never attended university. I think that's important, don't you? I think it's important that we remember the people who came before us, that we honor their work, that we tell their stories, because there are so many genius people in the world whose names we will never know. There are so many brilliant minds that have been lost to history simply because they didn't have access to the right opportunities. Marcus became determined to change that. He spent his life working to make sure that talent could be recognized no matter where it came from. No matter what color a person's skin was. No matter what kind of job their parents had. No matter what neighborhood they grew up in. 6 months after the conference, Professor Daniel Sheffield sat in a small apartment in a quiet part of London. He watched the evening news coverage of Marcus being welcomed to Oxford as their youngest research associate. He watched as journalists interviewed Marcus about his plans for the future. He watched his former student receiving honors and accolades. And I want you to understand what he was feeling in that moment. 'Cause this is important. This is where the real lesson of the story lies. Daniel was feeling many things. He was feeling regret. He was feeling shame. He was feeling the weight of knowing that his own choices had led to his downfall. He was feeling the pain of irrelevance. For so many years, he had been at the center of attention. He had been celebrated. He had been admired. And now he was forgotten. Nobody wanted to know him. Nobody wanted to work with him. Nobody wanted to hear what he had to say. But I want to tell you something because I think this is really important. I don't think Daniel was feeling regret because he suddenly became a better person. I don't think he was suddenly enlightened about his prejudices. I think he was feeling regret because his life had become smaller, because he had lost his status, because the consequences had finally caught up with him. And I think that's the difference between real growth and the appearance of growth. Real growth means changing your beliefs. Real growth means understanding why what you did was wrong. Real growth means becoming a better person. False growth is just regretting getting caught. But regardless of what Daniel was feeling internally, the important thing is that he had learned a lesson. He had learned that you cannot underestimate people based on their appearance or their background. He had learned that competence is not measured by the number of degrees you have on your wall. He had learned that intelligence and talent are not determined by social status or skin color. Marcus, on the other hand, had learned a very different lesson. He learned that speaking truth is more powerful than being silent. He learned that your background does not determine your potential. He learned that hard work and dedication can overcome any obstacle. He learned that education can come from many sources. not just universities and textbooks. But most importantly, he learned that the best revenge, the best response to cruelty, is not to become cruel yourself. The best response is to succeed. The best response is to build something extraordinary. The best response is to use your success to help others. In his most famous interview, when a journalist asked him what he would say to people who face similar prejudice and discrimination, Marcus said something that I think will stay with me forever. The best revenge is not to destroy those who harm us. The best revenge is to build something so beautiful, so extraordinary, so meaningful, that they spend the rest of their lives wondering how they failed to see our greatness when it was standing right in front of them. I want to talk to you about what this story means. Because this isn't just a story about one young man. This is a story about all of us. This is a story about the world we live in. How many genius minds are being overlooked right now because of prejudice? How many brilliant ideas are being silenced because they're coming from the wrong person? How many incredible discoveries are being missed because we're too busy looking at the packaging instead of the contents? Think about Marcus's grandfather. He spent 40 years researching an ancient language. 40 years of his life. And if Marcus hadn't inherited his work, that research would have died with him. All that knowledge, all that brilliance, all that dedication, it would have been lost forever. That's not just sad. That's a tragedy. That's a loss for all of humanity. And I think there are thousands of stories like this. Thousands of people whose genius has been overlooked. Thousands of contributions that have been lost because society didn't know how to see them. So what do we do about it? How do we fix this? First, I think we need to examine our own prejudices. We all have them. We all make assumptions about people based on how they look, where they come from, what their parents do, what their accent is. That's human nature. But we have a choice about what we do with those assumptions. We can choose to ignore them. We can choose to look deeper. We can choose to see the person in front of us, not the stereotype we expect. Second, I think we need to create more opportunities for people who don't have access to traditional pathways to success. We need to fund programs in low-income neighborhoods. We need to mentor young people who have potential but no guidance. We need to be the people who see potential where others see only limitations. Third, I think we need to celebrate achievements that come from unexpected places. We need to tell the stories of people like Marcus and his grandfather. We need to make sure that the world knows their names. We need to challenge the narrative that success only comes from privilege and traditional education. And finally, I think we need to teach people like Professor Daniel that their power does not come from making others feel small. Their power comes from sharing knowledge. Their power comes from lifting others up. Their power comes from being part of something bigger than themselves. Marcus is now in his 20s, and he's continued the work that his grandfather started. He has dedicated his life to finding lost languages and documenting them. He has created programs that teach linguistic preservation to students around the world. He has mentored dozens of young researchers, making sure that they have opportunities that might not have been available to them otherwise. Catherine, his mother, continues to run the Thompson Cultural Center. She has helped hundreds of young people discover their potential. She has shown them that where you come from is not a limitation. It's a foundation. It's the ground that you stand on. And from that ground you can reach for anything. Professor Daniel Sheffield never recovered from his fall. He attempted to rebuild his career, but the academic community would not accept him back. He eventually became a teacher at a small private school, far from the spotlight that he had once craved. By all accounts, he became a better person. Whether that was genuine transformation or just the result of circumstance, I don't know. But he did eventually apologize publicly for how he had treated Marcus. He acknowledged that his behavior had been wrong. And I think that's worth something. But the most important part of this story is not what happened to Daniel. The most important part is what happened to Marcus. The most important part is that a young man had the courage to stand up for himself. That he had the confidence in his knowledge to speak the truth even when everyone was against him. That he used his success to help others. I think that's what I want you to take away from this story. I want you to understand that genius can come from anywhere. I want you to recognize potential in unexpected places. I want you to be the person who sees people fully, not the person who judges them based on appearance or background. And if you're someone who has been told that you're not smart enough, not educated enough, not from the right place, I want you to know that that's not true. Your potential is not determined by other people's opinions of you. Your ability is not limited by their prejudices. You can do extraordinary things. You just have to believe in yourself, work hard, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. This is a story about hidden genius. But it's also a story about love. It's about a mother's love for her son. It's about a grandfather's love for his family, expressed through knowledge and wisdom. It's about Marcus's love for his family, expressed through dedication and success. That love is what changed everything. That love is what made the difference. So remember Marcus Thompson. Remember his grandfather Michael. Remember Catherine, who cleaned offices so her son could learn. Remember that the world